suppose we... for a little girl.
Long Ago and Far Away is made possible by grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the George Gund Foundation. Corporate funding is provided by the Stride-Right Charitable Foundation, committed to helping children discover the wonders of reading.
Once upon a time, long before radio or television, at a time when few people knew how to read, stories called folk tales were the evening's entertainment. Stories about magical creatures who turned into people, or magical people who turned into creatures. Places so strange that inside was outside and up was down. Dark, endless forests and nights without end. Stories that were told for centuries before anyone thought to write them down. Told around the fire when the day's work was done. Like these folk tales from Hungary. Tales told 1,000,000 times or more before they traveled here.
Once upon a time when the world was much younger, there lived an old couple who had nothing in the world but a young son, whom they called Janko Raven. When the boy grew up, he said to his parents, "Well, Mother and Father, I think it's time I went and earned some money." As his parents had no objections, Janko Raven set off. When he crossed the village border, he saw a troop of ants crossing from one field to another. Bringing up the rear was a little lame ant that fell into a deep rut and couldn't climb out. Taking pity, Janko bent down to help him. "Thank you for your kindness," said the ant. "Here, take this whistle, and whenever you're in trouble, just blow it and I'll come to help you." Janko pocketed the whistle and continued on his way. By nightfall, he arrived at a huge forest where he found a small house and a white-haired old man. "Good evening, Grandfather," said Janko. "Good evening, son. What can I do for you?" "I'm looking for a place where I could earn some money and bed for the night." The old man let Janko sleep in his house that night. In the morning, he said, "Well, son, at the other end of the forest, you'll find a wide pasture, and beyond that, the sea and a huge mountain. On top of the mountain, there lies a castle made of solid gold. That's where the king lives. Go to him. He will give you work." Janko thanked the old man for his advice and the bed and went on his way. Just as he reached the edge of the forest, a flock of ravens flew up before him. Walking on, he noticed one of the ravens flapping in the grass, unable to fly away. Its feathers were soaked through by the morning dew. Taking pity on the bird, Janko gathered it up and stroked its feathers until they were completely dried. "One good turn deserves another, Janko Raven. Here, take this whistle, and whenever you're in trouble, just blow it and I'll come to help you." Janko soon reached the sea at the foot of the mountain. As he stood there, he saw a tiny fish wriggling helplessly on the shore. Taking pity on the poor animal, Janko put the fish back into the sea. When the little fish recovered, he said, "One good turn deserves another. I will give you a whistle to add to the other two I know you have. Whenever you're in trouble, just blow it and I'll help you." So Janko pocketed this whistle too and began to climb the mountain. When Janko reached the castle, the king asked, "Well, lad, what can I do for you?" "I've come to enter into your service, Your Majesty." The king said, "Good. In my kingdom, 3 days count as 1 full year, and the pay is 300 gold coins. But if you fail to carry out my orders, you'll die 1,000 deaths. Is it a deal?" "Yes, it's a deal." On the first day at sunset, the king summoned Janko and said, "Go into the farmyard where you'll find 3 stacks of millet. By morning, pick out all the millet seeds and stack the millet and the straw separately. If you fail, you shall die." Janko was frightened almost out of his wits. Then he remembered the whistle given to him by the ants. Suddenly, millions and millions of ants were swarming round his feet. "What is the matter, dear friend?" "Oh, I'm in great trouble." And Janko told the ants what the king had ordered him to do. "Have no fear," said the ant king. "We'll get started, and by morning we'll have the millet and straw in 2 separate stacks." That was exactly what happened by the time the sun rose. "I see you have carried out my orders," said the king. "You may have the day off, but come to me again in the evening." That evening, the king said, "My 3 daughters are strolling in front of the castle. Go down and make sure no harm comes to them. If you fail, you shall die 1,000 deaths." So Janko sat down to guard the 3 princesses. But he was so tired that he soon fell asleep. The 3 princesses changed into ravens and flew away. When he woke up, he found that they were gone. Frightened almost out of his wits, he remembered the whistle given to him by the ravens. The birds appeared out of nowhere and asked, "What can we do for you, dear friends?" "I'm in great trouble. The king told me to look after his 3 daughters, but I fell asleep and they've disappeared." "Have no fear," said the Raven King. "Just sit on my back and take hold of these 3 halters, and off we go to find them." Janko climbed onto the raven's back and they flew up into the sky. When they flew behind the moon, they saw the 3 princesses sitting side by side in the shape of ravens. Janko threw a halter around each of their necks and took them back to the castle. On the eve of the 3rd day, the king summoned Janko once more. "Find me the golden ring I lost in the sea, or you'll die 1,000 deaths." Janko saw that the king really meant what he said. So he went to the seashore, where he blew the whistle given to him by the tiny fish. Almost at once, the sea in front of him was teeming with fish. "What can we do for you, dear friend?" Janko told him what the king had said. "Have no fear," said the fish king. "They'll find the ring." But as dawn began to break, they still hadn't found it. As a last resort, they looked for it in the stomach of a big fish. Sure enough, the ring was there. "So, my lad, you have served your time well. In return, I shall give you 1 of my daughters in marriage, half my kingdom, and 3 carts full of gold." But Janko didn't want to marry any of the princesses, nor did he want half the kingdom. All he asked for was the 3 carts full of gold, which he took back home to his parents. And together they lived happily ever after on cheese pies and donuts. Once upon a time, there lived an old woodcutter who was poor as a church mouse. One day he said to his wife, Bake me a couple of corn cakes that I can bring with me to the woods. His wife baked the cakes and put them into his bag, and the old man set off for the woods. Farther down the valley lived old Pluto and his clever young son called Pinko. Pinko heard the sound of the woodcutter's axe and came closer and closer to the old man. By and by, he found the woodcutter's bag and ate the corn cakes. His father suspected Pinko was up to no good. "Where are you, Pinko?" he called. "Here I am, Father." "What have you been up to?" "I've been eating up the old man's cakes." "Well, since you are so inconsiderate, you will have to serve him for 3 years in return." Pinko's heart sank. He turned around and went back to the old man and said, "Uncle, I ate your cakes." "Well, I hoped you liked them." "Yes, but now my father has told me to serve you for 3 years. Forget it, son. I can't afford another mouth to feed." "Oh, I'll earn my keep." And lo and behold, Pinko starts tearing up trees, stumps, roots, and all, knocking them together until they were broken into little pieces. By nightfall, he chopped up the entire forest. "Well, can we go home now?" "No, I have to collect dry branches for my wife." In a second, Pinko collected so many branches that 20 oxen couldn't have carried them. The next day, the woodcutter went to the rich farmers in the village to tell them the wood was all cut. They didn't believe it and sent their servants to check. But by evening, the servants reported that the wood was all piled up. So the farmers had to pay the old man. Then the woodcutter went home and decided with Pinko to go to the Baron and ask for work. "You've come at the right moment," said the Baron, "because there's enough plowing for 100 of you." So Pinko went to the market and bought 2 little calves. The field was full of farmhands plowing with 12 fat oxen. Pinko started plowing, and by midday had already plowed more ground than all the others with their 12 oxen. The field hands gazed at Pinko's magic calves and decided to buy them. But Pinko wanted a bushel full of gold and the 12 oxen, too. In the end, the field hands persuaded the Baron to buy them the calves. Pinko got the gold and the oxen, too. The laborers then tried plowing with the calves, but the calves wouldn't budge. They reported the problem to the Baron, who told them to find Pinko. So they brought him back. Pinko grabbed the handle of the plow with one arm, snapped his whip, and the 2 calves started plowing as before. "That's how you do it," he said, and went home. Both he and the old man decided that next they would go to the king to get some work. "I'm glad you come," said the king. "I have so much corn to thresh that there's enough work for 100 of you." They went to the barn where all the corn was stacked. Pinko just grabbed one stack and threshed it in 5 minutes. Then he took the rest of the stacks, wheat, oat, millet and barley, and he threshed everything. He reported to the king that he had finished the job. "Oh, you shouldn't have done it like that." "How did you want it done then?" "The wheat, barley, oats, and millet, each separately." "All right, I'll sort it out." Having said that, Pinko put each kind of grain in a separate pile. "What do I owe you?" "1 sack of wheat." "All right, whenever you want, you can come and get it." Pinko went home with the old man, collected linen cloth and sheets in a pile, and sewed the sack for a whole week. Next, they reported to the king. He ordered his farm bailiff to give Pinko a sack of wheat. They went to the back of the barn, took out their sack, and began stuffing the wheat into it. But only one corner of the sack was filled. So the bailiff went to the king to report what kind of sack Pinko had. The king said, "No, it doesn't matter. We have to pay him. But they won't get anything if they can't carry it away." So they kept filling the sack, putting in the wheat from last year, from the year before last, and from 10 years ago. And still the sack wasn't half filled. "What kind of a king have you got? He doesn't even have a sack full of grain to pay me," said Pinko to the bailiff. And he pulled up the sack and put it on his shoulder and left. He was so mad he didn't even say goodbye. But there was great jubilation at the house. They had everything: corn, wood, oxen, and gold. So they lived on happily. But at last, Pinko said to the old man, "The 3 years will be up tomorrow. I have to go home." They begged him to stay, but in vain. At home, Pinko was welcomed with great rejoicing, and is still living happily, if they haven't died yet. Once upon a time, there was a shopkeeper, a king, and a poor man. The shopkeeper used to go hunting in the forest, and one time he got so dreadfully lost that he wandered around for 3 days. He said, "Oh, Lord, if only someone would show me the way out, I'd give him the hand of my most beautiful daughter and 3 sacks of money." "I'll show you the way out." The shopkeeper looked down and saw a little hedgehog. He had no choice but to promise him his most beautiful daughter and the 3 sacks of money. On hearing the promise, the hedgehog led the way, and they reached the edge of the forest in less than half an hour. The following day, the king went hunting and got lost just like the shopkeeper. He said, "Oh, Lord, if only someone would show me the way out of the forest, I'd give him the hand of my most beautiful daughter and 3 cartloads of money. Just follow me." The king looked round and saw the hedgehog near his feet. He was so anxious that he couldn't care less who it was, as long as he got out of the forest. It was around this time that the poor man also got himself lost in the forest. He said, "Oh, Lord, I have nothing to my name, but even if a repugnant creature were to show me the way out, I'd adopt it as my own dear child." "Just follow me," said someone. As time passed, the shopkeeper, the king, and the poor man had almost forgotten the hedgehog. One night, after the poor man had gone to bed, someone knocked on his window. "Father, dear, please open the door." "Who can that be?" wondered the poor man, because he knew he had no children. "Hello, Father dear. I finally come home," said the hedgehog. "Welcome, my son. I'm glad you're here." "So am I. But would you please waken my dear mother to make my bed for me?" "Father dear, do you have 2 forints?" asked the hedgehog. "Yes, I do, my son." "Well, then please go into town. In the marketplace, you'll find a very old lady selling a black rooster. Please buy it for me. Then go to the harness maker and buy me a worn-out saddle." The poor man went into town, bought the black rooster and the worn-out saddle, and took them home where the hedgehog saddled the rooster and rode away as fast as the wind. He didn't stop until he reached the home of the shopkeeper. "Hey, shopkeeper, open the door." The shopkeeper nearly fell over backwards when he saw the hedgehog. He called forth his 3 daughters and told them the promise he had made this repugnant creature. The hedgehog paid no attention and chose the most beautiful daughter. "You are mine, and I am yours till death do us part." To be sure, the girl continued to cry and even threw herself on the floor, but she had no choice. She had to leave with the hedgehog. The shopkeeper harnessed the horses to the glass coach, put 3 sacks of money into another cart, and off they went. The hedgehog proudly riding his rooster alongside. "Are you still crying?" "I am," said the girl, "and I'll not stop crying till my dying day." "In that case," said the hedgehog, "I don't want you." He did, however, keep the 3 sacks of money, which he took home to the poor man. Time passed again, and one fine day he rode the rooster to the king's courtyard. He told the king why he'd come, hoping the king remembered his promise. "I only wish I had forgotten, but I haven't, and I always keep my word," said the king. He called in his 3 daughters and sadly told them what had happened and how this repugnant creature had come to pick his most beautiful daughter for his wife. The eldest daughter declared, "I refuse to be his wife." The second daughter said, "I'd rather die than be his wife." But the youngest princess said, "I'll be only too happy to be his wife because he was so kind to my dear father." The king was happy and sad at the same time. He was happy one of his daughters was so kind-hearted, but it was sad to lose his only kind-hearted daughter. The king loaded the treasure onto 3 carts, harnessed the horses to the royal coach, and the princess climbed in. The hedgehog, however, rode alongside on his black rooster. After a while, he looked into the coach and was surprised to see the princess wasn't crying. "Aren't you afraid of me?" asked the hedgehog. "Why should I be? I know you won't do me any harm," she replied. "Don't you find me repugnant?" asked the hedgehog. "Of course not," she replied. Then a miracle happened. The hedgehog shook itself and immediately turned into a tall, handsome prince who dazzled more than the sun. Then the rooster also shook itself and turned into a golden steed, and on the same spot, a sparkling palace emerged with diamond walls and diamond windows. They sent for the king, they sent for the poor man, and guests came from far and wide to enjoy the huge wedding. And that's the end of the tale, because they all lived happily ever after.
Folk tales are not only wonderful stories, they also help us understand what life was like long ago. Back then, most people were terribly poor, so they especially enjoyed stories about a clever hero who outsmarted everyone and got rich. Sound familiar? And because life was so hard, kindness from a stranger was particularly important. Amidst all the mean and foolish characters in folk tales, there always seemed to be a kind and generous stranger who is justly rewarded in the end. I love happy endings.
Long Ago and Far Away is made possible by grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the George Gund Foundation. Corporate funding is provided by the Strideright Charitable Foundation, committed to helping children discover the wonders of reading. Remember, stories from long ago and far away are as near as your local library.
This is PBS.